The steel bit into the frozen ground with a percussive grunt, a sound swallowed by the vast gray silence of the late autumn afternoon. Elias shifted his weight, driving the spade deeper, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Each shovelful of dark, cold earth was a victory measured in ounces. Beside the growing mound of dirt, a large, brindle-coated dog with intelligent, patient eyes sat on its haunches, its head cocked. Boulder did not whine or pace. He simply watched, a quiet witness to his master's strange and solitary labor. The hole was already 10 feet deep, a precise rectangle cut into the earth behind the small, weathered cabin Elias had inherited. It was not a root cellar, not a well. It was the beginning of something else entirely. He worked with a rhythm born of long practice, a conservation of movement that his father had taught him. Lift, turn, deposit. The muscles in his back and shoulders were a tight weave of familiar aches. His hands, though calloused, were raw from the cold and the constant friction of the hickory handle. He paused, resting his chin on the top of the spade, and looked out across the valley. The other homesteads dotted the landscape, their chimneys sending up lazy curls of smoke, promises of warmth and companionship he did not have. His own chimney was cold. The work was his fire now. A voice, sharp and thin in the cold air, cut through his concentration. "What in heaven's name are you doing, boy?" Elias turned slowly. Mr. Albright stood at the edge of his property line, a stout, red-faced man whose 60 years were etched into a permanent mask of skepticism. He leaned on the fence post, his arms crossed over his thick wool coat. Boulder let out a low, soft growl, more a vibration than a sound. "Digging," Elias said. His voice was quiet, unused. "I can see that," Albright snapped, his tone laced with the impatience of a man who believed he had seen everything. "I'm not blind. The question is why. Are you digging your own grave? Trying to get a head start before the winter finishes the job your grief started?" Elias looked from the man back to the hole, its dark geometry a stark contrast to the dying grass. "Building," Albright scoffed, a harsh barking sound. "Building what? A home for moles? You have a perfectly good house your father left you, a solid house. Wasting your time digging in the dirt when you should be splitting wood. Do you have any idea what kind of winter they're predicting? The almanac says it'll be a killer. The squirrels are burying their nuts deeper than I've ever seen." "I have a plan," Elias stated, his gaze unwavering. He drove the spade into the earth again, the sound a definitive full stop. "A plan," Albright muttered, shaking his head as he turned away. "The boy's lost his mind. That's the craziest thing I've ever seen. Wait until the first freeze. Wait until the ground is hard as iron. He'll learn." The words carried back to Elias on the wind, meant to be heard. Elias did not watch him go. He kept digging. Boulder shifted, nudging his cold nose into Elias's hand. The dog understood. He did not need words or plans. He only needed to trust. Later that night, with the wind beginning to moan around the eaves of the cabin, Elias sat at his father's small writing desk. The oil lamp cast a warm, flickering glow on a leather-bound journal. He ran a finger over the brittle pages, filled with his father's precise, angular script and detailed ink drawings. His father had been an engineer back east, a man fascinated by geology and thermodynamics, a man who saw the world as a series of elegant systems. The book was not a diary of feelings, but a record of observations, calculations, and theories. He stopped on a page titled "The Earth's Constant." It was filled with diagrams of thermal gradients, notes on geothermal stability, and sketches of subterranean structures. One sentence was underlined twice. "Below the frost line, the Earth does not freeze. At 30 feet, it holds a steady, life-sustaining warmth, a gentle heat that asks for nothing but to be reached." Beside it, a stark note. "The wind is the killer. Fire is a fragile defense. The earth is the only true shelter. Elias traced the drawing of a long, reinforced tunnel, with vents designed to draw in cold air, warm it in the deep channels, and circulate it back out. It was not a grave, it was a lung. He closed the book. He had enough wood for a normal winter, but Mr. Albright was right about one thing. This would not be a normal winter. The digging continued for weeks. The first hard frost came, glazing the world in a brittle shell of silver and making the topsoil unyielding. Elias used a heavy iron pick, shattering the frozen earth, his shoulders screaming with the effort. He worked from dawn until the light failed, a solitary figure against a vast, indifferent landscape. Mrs. Gable, whose farm bordered his to the south, brought him a steaming bowl of stew one afternoon. She was a kind woman, her face a roadmap of worry. "Elias, you're getting too thin," she said, her eyes fixed on the deepening hole. "This isn't healthy. Your father would want you to be inside, tending the hearth, not this." She gestured at the pit, which was now deeper than she was tall, with a crude ladder leading down into the darkness. "The whole valley is talking. They say you're digging for gold, or that you're just digging to keep the sorrow at bay." "I'm all right, Mrs. Gable," he said, accepting the stew. "Thank you." "Talk to me, child. What is this for?" "It's a storm tunnel." Her brow furrowed. "A root cellar? It's far too deep for a cellar." "Deeper is warmer," he said simply, taking a spoonful of the rich, hot stew. It was the best thing he had tasted in a month. "That doesn't make any sense," she said, her voice gentle, as if explaining a simple truth to a confused child. "Everyone knows the deeper you go, the colder it gets. It's just common sense." She left soon after, her kindness mixed with a profound sense of pity. Elias finished the stew, the warmth spreading through his chest. He knew how it sounded. He knew what they thought. But he also knew the difference between common sense and uncommon knowledge. His father's journal was filled with the latter. By the time the first snow flurries danced in the air, the main tunnel was 20 feet deep and stretched 50 feet, branching from the hidden entrance in his cellar out under the barren field. He had begun the arduous process of shoring it up. He felled pine and oak from the woodlot his father had managed, limbing them with an axe and hauling the massive logs with a block and tackle rig. The work was slow and dangerous. A single misstep, a single moment of inattention, and the tons of earth above him could become his tomb. Boulder would sit at the entrance in the cellar, whining softly whenever Elias was down in the dark for too long, his anxiety a living clock. Inside the tunnel, the air was still and cool, but not cold. It smelled of damp earth, stone, and the sharp, clean scent of fresh-cut pine. He worked by the light of a single lantern, his world reduced to the next beam to be set, the next section of wall to be reinforced. He lined the walls with heavy planking, leaving small gaps for the earth to breathe. He was not fighting the ground, he was cooperating with it. One afternoon, a visitor arrived who did not offer advice or pity. Sarah, the blacksmith's daughter, stopped by on her way back from town. She was leading a horse laden with supplies, and she paused at his fence line, not with judgment, but with an open, honest curiosity. She was known for her quiet competence and for having little patience for the town's gossip. "Mr. Albright says you're trying to dig to the other side of the world," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. Her eyes were clear and direct. Elias stopped his work, leaning on a half-finished support beam. "Not that far." "What is it then?" she asked, her tone genuine. "If you don't mind my asking." He found himself explaining, something he had not done for anyone else. "It's a geothermal shelter. The ground temperature, deep down, stays about 50 degrees, no matter how cold it gets up here. The tunnel acts like a heat exchanger. He pointed to a smaller shaft he had begun to dig, angled towards the surface. "That will be an intake vent. The cold air will come in, sink, get warmed by the earth walls, and then a second, higher vent will draw the warmer air up, creating a slow, constant circulation. It won't be hot, but it won't freeze." She listened, her head tilted, processing the information. She didn't mock him. She didn't look at him with pity. She looked at the structure, her gaze analytical. "My father has a book about Roman engineering. They used a similar idea for cooling their villas in the summer. A hypocaust system, but in reverse." Elias felt a flicker of something he hadn't realized was missing. Not approval, but understanding. "My father was an engineer. He drew up the plans." "It's a lot of work for one person," she said, her eyes noting the exhaustion etched on his face, the raw state of his hands. "It needs to be done," he said. She nodded, a simple, affirming gesture. "Well, I hope it works." She didn't say it with doubt, but with sincerity. As she rode away, Elias felt a renewed strength. One person understood. That was enough. He spent the next month finishing the interior. He built wooden shelves into the earthen walls, stocking them with precise care. 150 jars of canned vegetables from his mother's last harvest. 50 pounds of flour in sealed tins. 20 pounds of salt-cured pork. He hauled in casks of fresh water, a small wood stove, and a carefully rationed pile of dry hardwood for it, placing it near the main cellar entrance where the ventilation was best. He ran a stovepipe up a concealed flue, a design from his father's journal that would keep the smoke from filling the tunnel. This stove wasn't for warmth. The earth provided that. It was for cooking, for boiling water, for morale. He laid down raised plank flooring to keep them off the damp ground and piled dozens of wool blankets on a wide sleeping shelf. He installed 3 oil lamps with reflectors that cast a steady, soft glow. The tunnel was no longer a hole in the ground. It was a haven. It was a promise. The snows began in earnest in mid-December. Not the gentle, picturesque flakes of early winter, but a hard, driving snow, pushed by a wind that sounded like a keening animal. The valley hunkered down. The smoke from the chimneys became frantic, desperate plumes. Elias spent his days inside his cabin, watching the world disappear under a blanket of white. He kept a small fire going, conserving his main woodpile. The temperature dropped steadily, 10 degrees, 0, 10 below. The old-timers in the village had never seen it stay so cold for so long. The wind never stopped. It scoured the landscape, piling snow into monstrous drifts, burying fences and outbuildings. One evening, Elias stood by his window, looking towards Albright's farm. The plume of smoke from his chimney, usually thick and constant, was sputtering. It thinned, turned gray, and then, in a sickening puff, it vanished. Elias watched for an hour. It did not return. The temperature outside was now 27 below zero, and the wind was gusting to 50 miles per hour. No fire meant a house would turn into a tomb of ice in a matter of hours. He had just finished checking the seals on his cellar door when the sound came. It was a frantic, desperate pounding, muffled by the storm. Boulder was at the door first, a deep rumble in his chest. Elias opened it to a wall of swirling snow and a figure so caked in ice it was barely human. It was Albright. His eyebrows and mustache were solid white. His face was a waxy, terrifying gray. "Elias," he croaked, his voice cracking. "Help us. The wood, it's gone. We burned through everything. The house is as cold as a barn. My wife, she can't stop shaking." Elias didn't hesitate. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't mention the almanac or the squirrels. He said only 2 words. "Come in." He helped Albright inside, stripping off his frozen coat. Then he turned and pulled on his own heavy gear. "Where are they?" "Still at the house. We didn't know where else to go." "Stay here, get warm," Elias commanded. He grabbed a lantern and 2 heavy blankets, and with Boulder at his heels, he plunged into the storm. The world outside was a nightmare of white noise and biting, relentless cold. He could barely see 10 feet. The wind tore at him, trying to steal the breath from his lungs. But he knew this land. He walked the fence line, one hand on the familiar wood, a lifeline in the chaos. He found the Albright house dark and silent, a ghost ship in a frozen sea. Inside, the cold was shocking, a physical presence that felt colder than the air outside. Mrs. Albright was huddled under a pile of quilts on the bed, her breathing shallow, her skin deathly pale. 2 grandchildren were with her, their faces pinched and blue. "We're getting you out," Elias said, his voice firm, projecting a certainty he did not entirely feel. He wrapped them in the heavy wool blankets he had brought, and one by one, he half carried, half dragged them through the blizzard, following the fence line back to his cabin. The journey was 100 yards, but it felt like miles. He led them not to his fireside, but to the cellar door. Albright looked at him, his face a mask of confusion and fear. "What?" "This is my home," Elias said, pulling open the heavy, insulated door. A wave of cool, but not freezing, air washed over them. It smelled of earth and pine. He led them down the steps. When he lit the first lantern in the tunnel, their gasps echoed in the enclosed space. It was not warm like a hearth, but it was a profound, life-giving 50 degrees. The wind was gone. The oppressive, killing cold was gone. It was still, silent, and safe. Mrs. Albright began to weep, deep, shuddering sobs of pure relief. The children, their fear melting away, looked around with wide, curious eyes at the long, lamp-lit corridor. Elias settled them on the sleeping platform, covering them with more blankets. He lit the small stove and put a kettle on to boil. Within the hour, more desperate arrivals appeared at his door. The Gables, their faces streaked with frozen tears, Mrs. Gable's earlier pity replaced by raw terror. "Our chimney is blocked with ice," she cried. "The smoke backed up. We almost suffocated before the fire went out." "Come," Elias said, "down here." And then came others. The Websters, with their newborn baby. Then the Millers. Finally, Sarah arrived with her parents, their faces grim. Her father, the blacksmith, a man of immense physical strength, looked humbled. "The cold is breaking the house apart," he said. "The wood is shrinking, letting the wind in everywhere. We can't keep it warm." Sarah's eyes met Elias's in the lamplight of the tunnel. She didn't say anything. She just gave him a small, profound nod. It worked. For 3 days the blizzard raged. 23 people lived in Elias's tunnel. They were the lucky ones. The space was crowded but orderly. Elias organized watches, rationed food, and tended to those with frostbite, his hands surprisingly gentle as he applied salves and bandages. The small stove provided hot water for tea and thin soup. The air was breathable, circulated by the ingenious vents his father had designed. They were a small subterranean village, a pocket of life buried beneath a world of frozen death. In the quiet, they could hear the storm, a distant, monstrous howl, a reminder of the fate they had been spared. Mr. Albright sat on a wooden crate, watching Elias distribute soup. The old man's face was no longer skeptical or mocking. It was filled with a deep, soul-shaking awe. He watched as Elias calmed the frightened Webster baby, as he shared his own blanket with one of the shivering children. He was not a mad boy digging a pointless hole. He was a visionary. He was their savior. On the morning of the 4th day, a profound silence fell. The wind had stopped. Elias climbed the steps and pushed open the outer cellar door. He was met by a wall of snow. It took him an hour to dig a narrow channel out into the open. When he finally emerged, the world was unrecognizable. The sun was blindingly bright on a landscape of pure, sculpted white. The snow was piled 15, 20 feet deep in places. The valley was silent. There were no birds, no animals, no sign of life. The other cabins were almost completely buried, only their roof peaks visible, dark triangles in an ocean of snow. It was a beautiful, terrifying graveyard. One by one, the others emerged from the tunnel, blinking in the harsh light, their faces a mixture of wonder and horror. They saw what Elias saw. They understood. Without this tunnel, they would all be frozen in their homes. They would be stories told next spring by the thaw. Mr. Albright walked over to Elias, his feet sinking deep into the snow. The old man's eyes were wet. He put a heavy hand on Elias's shoulder. "I was a fool, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was an arrogant old fool. I mocked you." He looked around at the silent, buried valley, at the faces of his wife and grandchildren, alive and safe. "You saved us. You saved all of us." He looked at the entrance to the tunnel, a simple, unassuming opening in the snow. It worked. My God, it actually worked. Mrs. Gable hugged him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Elias," she whispered. "Thank you for not listening to us." The work of digging out began. It was a long, slow process. They discovered that their livestock had frozen in the barns. Their wood piles were buried under impassable drifts. Their homes were damaged, windows shattered by the wind's force. But they were alive. The tunnel became their base of operations, the warm, safe heart of their small community of survivors. They shared the food Elias had stored, cooked communal meals on his small stove, and slept in the stable warmth of the earth until they could make their own homes habitable again. When spring finally came, melting the great snows and revealing the true extent of the damage, the people of the valley did not just rebuild, they changed. The first community project, proposed by Mr. Albright himself at a town meeting, was to help Elias expand the tunnel. "We were proud," Albright told the assembled families. "We were proud of our strong houses and our big fires. We thought we knew how to survive the winter. We were wrong. We survived because one young man listened to a different kind of wisdom. He didn't argue. He didn't boast. He just built." That summer, the valley worked together. Under Elias's quiet direction, they extended the main tunnel, dug new branches, and created larger communal chambers for storage and shelter. They learned the principles from Elias's father's journal, marveling at the simple, elegant science of it. They called the network the Warren. It became a permanent feature of their town, a symbol of their shared vulnerability and their collective strength. Each family had an entrance from their own cellar, a doorway to safety. Years passed. The valley prospered. The story of the Great Blizzard of 1888 became a local legend, a tale told to children to teach them about humility and the importance of preparation. Elias married Sarah in a quiet ceremony in the town's new meeting hall. Their bond, forged in respect and tested by crisis, was a deep and unshakable thing. They raised 2 children in the small cabin, teaching them to listen to the wind, to watch the animals, and to trust the earth. Elias never became a loud man. He remained quiet, observant, and patient. He was a respected elder in the community, the man they turned to when the almanac predicted a hard winter or when a new foundation needed to be laid. He never spoke of the time he was mocked, and he never held it against anyone. His actions had spoken for him, and their echoes had lasted for years. Boulder grew old. His brindle muzzle turned gray, His movements became stiff, but his intelligent eyes never lost their patient light. He would spend his days sleeping by the fire in the winter, or lying in the sun near the main entrance to the warren in the summer. One autumn evening, 17 years after the great storm, the old dog laid his head on Elias's lap as they sat by the hearth, sighed a soft, contented breath, and did not wake up. Elias buried him under the large oak tree that shaded the tunnel's entrance, marking the spot with a simple, smooth river stone. There was no melodrama, only a quiet, profound grief for a loyal witness who had never doubted. Time flowed on, a steady river. The children grew up and had children of their own. The warren was used twice more during major storms, saving a new generation from the fury of the winter winds. It became a part of their heritage, the physical manifestation of their community's soul. Elias and Sarah grew old together, their hands wrinkled, their hair the color of snow. They saw the world change, saw the railroad come through, saw the town grow. But the core of their life, the quiet rhythm of the seasons, and the respect for the earth remained the same. When Elias was 82 years old, he died peacefully in his sleep, in the same bed, in the same cabin where he had studied his father's journals so many years before. The entire valley turned out for his funeral. They did not bury him in the churchyard. They laid him to rest on the small hill behind his cabin, next to the river stone that marked Boulder's grave, overlooking the entrance to the shelter he had built. Mr. Albright's grandson, now a master carpenter, carved his headstone. It didn't list his date of birth or death. It bore no grand pronouncements. It was made of solid oak, weathered to a silver gray, and on it were carved just 7 words, an epitaph the entire community had agreed upon. He listened to the earth. It saved us. Decades later, long after the last person who remembered the great blizzard was gone, the town remained. It was a modern town now, with paved roads and electric lights. But behind the old cabin, which was now a small museum, the heavy wooden door to the warren still stood. The oak and pine timbers inside, seasoned by a century of stable, subterranean air, were as strong as the day they were set. Children on school tours would venture a little way into the tunnel, their laughter echoing in the cool, earthy silence. They would run their hands over the tool marks on the wooden beams and listen to the story of the quiet man who dug a hole in the ground. One crisp autumn afternoon, a young girl, a direct descendant of Elias and Sarah, stood before the entrance. The air had a familiar, sharp bite to it, the kind that hinted at a long winter to come. She looked at the weathered headstone, then placed her small hand flat against the heavy wood of the tunnel door. She could feel no warmth, no vibration, no hint of the life it had once protected. But she could feel its presence. It was a quiet, solid, and certain thing. A promise made to the future, rooted deep in the constant, unwavering heart of the earth. The structure was still standing. It was his home. It was his legacy.